My own son-in-law, Mark, humiliated me in front of our entire church community. At the Sunday potluck right by the dessert table, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "Carol, this is too much. We need you to back off." My daughter, Emily, his wife, just stood beside him, staring at a crack in the linoleum floor as if it was the most interesting thing in the world. Friend, before I go on, let me ask you, would you do me a kindness? Tap subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It helps me see just how far my story reaches. The whispers started instantly. I saw Betty Ann clutch her pearls, and Pastor John's wife suddenly got very busy rearranging the napkins. No one said a word to me. I felt a hot blush creep up my neck. I just mumbled, "Oh, of course, dear," and turned away, leaving my famous 7-layer salad right there on the table. The walk to my car in the church parking lot felt like a mile long. Every step echoed with the shame of being cast aside by my own family. Just as I sat down in the driver's seat, my hands trembling, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from Mark. And that cold little message was about to turn my heartbreak into something else entirely. I sat there in my quiet car, the sound of the church choir faintly practicing in the background. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely read the words on the screen. The text was from Mark, my son-in-law. It was short, cruel, and to the point. "Carol, we need space. My family needs to stand on its own 2 feet. Stay away from our family. Don't call or text." Each word felt like a tiny sharp stone hitting a window until it finally cracked. Stay away? After all I'd done? After all the love and support I had poured into their lives, into my grandson Leo's life? It didn't make any sense. My first thought was of Emily. My sweet daughter must be so upset. I immediately dialed her number, my heart pounding in my chest. I just needed to hear her voice, to have her explain this nightmare. But the phone just rang and rang, before finally clicking over to her cheerful voicemail message. "Hi, you've reached Emily, leave a message." I hung up without saying a word. She didn't pick up. And in that deep, echoing silence, I knew. My daughter had chosen a side. But I had to wonder, did she have any idea what her husband was really hiding from her? I spent the rest of that day in a fog, walking through the quiet rooms of the house my late husband and I had built together. Every corner held a memory of Emily. Her little handprints on the wall that I never painted over. The spot in the living room where Mark had asked for my blessing to marry her. I thought about everything I'd done for them. The down payment on their house in that nice Westerwood neighbourhood. The new SUV when Leo was born because they needed something safer. Even the expensive golf clubs Mark just had to have last Christmas. My support wasn't just a gift. It was the foundation they had built their entire life on. As the sun went down, my grief began to curdle into something else. It was a cold, hard anger. How dare he? How dare he throw me away after taking so much? That's when I remembered the binder. The one my husband, a man who always planned for every possibility, had helped me create years ago. It was tucked away in his old office, filled with documents and secrets. A secret Mark had long forgotten, and one that was about to give me back all the power he thought he had taken from me. What do you think was in that binder? I clicked on the little brass lamp in my late husband's office. The room still smelled a bit like him, a comforting mix of old books and coffee. I opened the heavy binder, its leather cover worn smooth over the years. The label on the spine read, "Henderson Trust." You see, my husband was a very careful man. He didn't believe in leaving things to chance. As I flipped through the pages, my heart steadied. There was the deed to the house my daughter Emily and her husband Mark lived in. But their names weren't the owners. The Henderson Trust was. I was the trustee, the one in charge. They were living there under a special agreement, a family agreement, paying a tiny amount that barely covered the taxes. My husband always said, "Protect your own, Carol. Family first, but be smart about it." He made sure that our biggest assets were protected, just in case. I ran my finger down the typed page of their rental agreement. I wasn't a co-signer on a loan they had. I was their landlord. And Mark, my arrogant son-in-law, had just broken the most important rule. And there it was, in black and white, a little sentence we put in just in case. It said the agreement could be ended for a material breach of familial goodwill. I guess being told to stay away counts, doesn't it? The next morning, I didn't call my friends for comfort. I didn't cry to my sister. I made a different kind of call. I dialed the number for Mr. Davies, my financial advisor for the past 20 years. He's a calm, professional man who doesn't get emotional about numbers, and right now, that's exactly what I needed. He answered with his usual polite, "Good morning, Carol." I didn't waste any time with small talk. I explained the situation to him in a steady voice, without any tears. I didn't ask him if I was doing the right thing. I only asked him one question. What is the fastest, most legal way to dissolve a tenant-at-will agreement in the state of Ohio? There was a short pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Davies knew my family. He knew how much I loved Emily. But he also knew business. "With the proper documentation, which I know you have," he said, his voice even, "a 3-day notice to quit is legally binding." He didn't ask me why. He just told me how. That's why I trusted him. He knew that this wasn't about feelings anymore. This was about consequences. He told me, "I can have a courier deliver it tomorrow morning, Carol. You just have to say the word." And what do you think I said? After I hung up with Mr. Davies, the weight of it all came crashing down on me. I spent that night walking from room to room in my empty house, twisting the wedding ring on my finger. 1 minute, my blood was boiling with anger at Mark. The next, my heart ached for my sweet daughter Emily and my little grandson Leo. What would this do to him? Would he think his grandma was a monster for making them leave their home? I sat in the dark living room, staring at a picture of Emily on the mantel, her bright, happy smile from her high school graduation. Was I about to destroy my own daughter's life just to teach her foolish husband a lesson? This was the hardest decision of my life. I nearly picked up the phone a dozen times to call it all off, but then I remembered Mark at that potluck, his smirk as he dismissed me in front of everyone. I remembered his text message, so cold and final. I remembered him patting my hand at a barbecue last summer. "We'd be lost without you, Carol," he'd said with a big fake smile. He thought it was a joke. He thought I was just a silly old woman with a checkbook. Thinking of that smug look on his face, that's what did it. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I made a pot of coffee and sat at my kitchen table just waiting. I wasn't there, of course, but I can picture it perfectly. A man in a neat uniform walking up the tidy stone path to their front door. My son-in-law, Mark, probably opened it with a confident smile, thinking it was a package he'd ordered. The courier would have said, "Signature required," holding out a crisp, legal-sized envelope. Mark would have signed without a thought. Then he would have closed the door, opened the seal, and his whole world would have fallen apart. I can just see his face as he read the words, "Notice to quit," the legal jargon making it clear he had 72 hours to leave the property. His confusion would have turned to anger in a heartbeat. He probably stomped through the house that wasn't his, and yelled, "Your mother has lost her mind," to my daughter, Emily. He called me, of course. My phone rang over and over, buzzing angrily on my kitchen counter. I just watched it, took a calm sip of my coffee, and didn't answer. When he couldn't reach me, who do you suppose he called next? A few hours later, my phone rang again. This time, the screen showed Emily's picture. My heart ached, but I knew I had to be strong. I answered with a simple, "Hello, Emily." Her voice came through in a rush, filled with tears and panic. "Mum, how could you? You're throwing us out on the street. You're throwing your own grandson out. Mark is losing his mind." She was just repeating all the things he had likely screamed at her all morning. He had made himself the victim, and me, the monster. I let her cry for a moment before I spoke, my voice much calmer than I felt. "I didn't do this, Emily. Mark's text message did. I could hear her sniffle on the other end. He asked me to stay away from your family. The house, the car, the credit card I pay for. Those are all part of my life. So I'm removing my life from yours, just like he asked. There was a long silence. Just before she hung up, her voice dropped to a scared whisper. Mum, there's more to it. Mark, he's in some kind of trouble. What kind of trouble could be so bad he'd risk his own home? Emily, what kind of trouble? I asked, my voice firm but gentle. The anger on the line was gone, replaced by the sound of my daughter's fear. She started talking, the words tumbling out like a secret she couldn't hold in anymore. She told me Mark had been acting strangely for months. He was getting secret phone calls that he would take in the garage. He was getting letters from banks she didn't recognize and hiding them from her. They had been fighting constantly about money, about credit card bills that were getting bigger and bigger. I don't understand it, she cried. He kept saying he had it under control, that it was just a temporary problem from work. Then she said the words that made everything click into place. He said we just needed to get our finances away from your eyes for a little while so he could sort it out on his own. Away from my eyes. Suddenly, it all made a terrible kind of sense. He wasn't pushing me away out of pride. He was building a wall, trying to hide something from the one person he knew would see the truth in the numbers. But what was he hiding that was so awful? While I was at home worrying, my son-in-law Mark was trying to pretend everything was normal. My daughter Emily told me all about it later. He got up, put on his best suit, and walked out to the shiny Lexus SUV he was so proud of. It was his company car, a big symbol of his so-called success. He drove to the gas station to fill it up, same as any other day, but when he tried to pay with the company gas card, the young man behind the counter shook his head. "Sorry, sir," he said. "It's declined." Mark, embarrassed, tried his personal credit card. That was declined too. He had to pay with the last $20 bill in his wallet, his face burning with shame. He immediately called his company's fleet manager, the man in charge of the cars. "What's going on with my gas card?" Mark demanded. The manager sounded confused. "Sorry, Mark, we just got an email from the top. Your vehicle privileges have been suspended pending a review." Suspended. Mark must have been so confused, so angry. How could I, his sweet retired mother-in-law who spent her days gardening, have any power over his job? He was about to find out. Mark drove straight to his office, that big fancy building downtown. He was so full of rage, he didn't even go to his own desk. He stormed right up to the top floor, to the office of the CEO, Mr. Dave Peterson. He planned to complain, to demand answers. But when the secretary showed him in, Dave was just sitting there behind his huge desk, waiting for him. He didn't look surprised at all. "Mark," he said, his voice as cold as ice. "I was hoping you'd come see me." Dave leaned forward. "Your mother-in-law, Carol, is like a sister to me. Her late husband, Robert, was my best friend and my first business partner. Before he died, he made me promise I'd always look out for his family. A promise," Dave said, "that you just made very difficult for me to keep." Mark's face went pale. The job he was so proud of wasn't something he had earned all on his own. It was a favor. It was a promise made to the memory of the good man whose wife he had just betrayed. Dave looked him right in the eye and said, "You have until 5 o'clock today to make this right with Carol. If you don't, you can clear out your desk. Now get out of my office." What would a desperate man do with a deadline like that? Back at the house, my daughter Emily was living a nightmare. With Mark gone for the day and the eviction notice sitting on the kitchen counter like a ticking bomb, she finally decided to look for answers herself. She opened their shared laptop, her hands shaking. She was looking for the credit card statements Mark had hidden from her. She found them, but she also found something so much worse. It wasn't just careless spending. It was emails from online betting websites with subject lines like, "Congratulations on your big win," and "Deposit more funds to keep playing." Then she saw the loan statements. They weren't from a normal bank. They were from those awful payday loan places with huge interest rates that trap people. Mark didn't have a spending problem. He had a gambling problem. He had been losing their money, thousands and thousands of dollars, and lying about it for months. Her heart was pounding, the screen a blur through her tears. This was bad, worse than anything she had ever imagined. But then she saw it, tucked away in a hidden folder on the desktop. The folder was labelled My Side of the Story. What on earth could that mean? With trembling fingers, my daughter Emily clicked open the folder on the laptop named My Side of the Story. It wasn't a diary. It was filled with screenshots of text messages between her husband, Mark, and his friends. The messages went back for almost a year. As Emily read, her heart shattered into a million tiny pieces. In the texts, Mark twisted every kind thing I had ever done for them and turned it into something ugly. He complained about the family vacation I paid for, calling it a power trip. He mocked the savings bond I bought for my grandson Leo, calling me a controlling old woman. One text to his friend read, "Had to let Carol buy the new lawnmower. Now I'll never hear the end of it." He was painting me as a villain, a monster who used her money to control him. And he had been feeding these same lies to Emily for months, slowly poisoning her mind against me. She finally understood. Telling me to stay away wasn't a random, angry decision. It was part of his plan all along, a plan to cut her off from the one person who could expose his secrets. And the worst part? She had let him do it. While Emily was discovering the truth about Mark's lies, I was on the phone with my financial advisor, Mr. Davies. After our last talk, he had a bad feeling. He decided to do a little more research on the house, just to be safe. His voice on the phone was grim, serious in a way I'd never heard before. "Carol," he said, "I ran a title search on the property. There's a problem, a big one." My heart started to beat a little faster. "What is it, Mr. Davies?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "A second mortgage was taken out against the house 3 months ago," he told me, "for $50,000. I nearly dropped the phone. The house was owned by the trust, free and clear. I would never borrow money against it. "But I never signed anything," I whispered, the words getting stuck in my throat. I could almost hear him shaking his head on the other end of the line. And then Mr. Davies said the words that turned this family crisis into something much, much darker. "I know, Carol. That's the problem. The signature on this document is not yours. This is bank fraud. Bank fraud." The words echoed in my silent kitchen. My son-in-law wasn't just a gambler and a liar. He was a criminal. He had forged my name and stolen $50,000. In that moment, any drop of pity I had left for him evaporated. This was no longer about a broken heart. It was about protecting my family from a man who would commit a felony. I took a deep breath, my decision made. I called my daughter Emily. When she answered, her voice was thick with tears. I didn't give her a chance to speak. "Emily," I said, my voice cold and hard as steel, "I know everything. The gambling, the lies he told you about me, and I know about the $50,000 he stole by forging my name." I let that sink in. There was only shocked silence on the other end. "You have 1 hour," I continued, "to get your husband and bring him to my front door. If you don't, my very next call is to the Westerwood Police Department." I hung up the phone without waiting for a reply. The clock was ticking. What would my daughter do? Would she protect her criminal husband, or would she finally choose the truth? I spent the next hour pacing in my living room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I kept glancing out the window down the quiet street. What was happening in that house? Was my daughter Emily fighting with him? Was she falling for his lies again? Or was she finally standing up for herself? I imagined the short drive from their house to mine. It was only 10 minutes, but I bet it felt like a lifetime. I can just picture it. Emily behind the wheel, her hands gripping it so tight her knuckles were white, Her face would have been like stone. All the tears were gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. And her husband, my son-in-law Mark, would have been sitting in the passenger seat. The arrogant man who had tried to throw me away was gone. In his place would be a terrified little boy, shrinking smaller and smaller with every turn of the wheels. There would have been no words spoken between them. The only sound would have been the hum of the engine, pulling them closer and closer to the consequences he had created. And then, through my living room window, I saw their car pull up to the curb. The engine cut off, and the world seemed to hold its breath. What would he do when he saw me? I opened my front door before they even reached the porch. Emily looked at me, her eyes filled with a sad apology. But Mark, my son-in-law, couldn't even meet my gaze. He stopped a few feet away from me on the stone walkway. And then, the man who had puffed out his chest with so much pride just days before, did something I never expected. He fell to his knees on my welcome mat. He just collapsed, his whole body shaking as he started to sob. It wasn't a trick, it was the sound of a completely broken man. "Carol, I'm so sorry," he cried, his voice muffled by his hands. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll pay it all back. Don't call the police. Please don't ruin my life." I just stood there looking down at him. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel powerful. I just felt a deep, heavy sadness for my daughter, for my grandson, and for the mess this man had made of our lives. After a long moment, I spoke. "Get up, Mark," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We need to talk about this." He slowly got to his feet, his face streaked with tears. He probably thought the worst was over. He had no idea it was just beginning. Because I wasn't the only one waiting for him inside. I led Mark and Emily into my living room, and that's when he saw them. Sitting on my floral sofa were his own parents, a sweet retired couple named Frank and Sharon. Mark stopped dead in his tracks, his face turning from pale to ghostly white. His mother, Sharon, had tears in her eyes. His father, Frank, just looked at his son with a deep, profound disappointment that was worse than any anger. I had called them an hour before. I told them their son was in serious trouble and that they deserved to hear the truth from me, not from a police officer. "Mum? Dad?" Mark whispered, his voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" His father didn't answer him. He just looked at me. "Frank, Sharon, thank you for coming on such short notice," I said calmly. Then I turned to my son-in-law. "I thought your parents should be here to understand the full situation." Mark just stared, his mouth hanging open. He looked from his parents' heartbroken faces to the neat stack of papers I had placed on the coffee table. He knew in that moment that there was no escape. Did he have any idea what was in that stack of papers? No one spoke. The only sound in my living room was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I sat down in my armchair and picked up the first paper from the stack on the coffee table. "This is the deed to the house Mark and Emily live in," I said, my voice calm and even. I passed it to Frank, Mark's father. "As you can see, it is owned by my family's trust." Next, I showed them the cruel text message Mark had sent me. Then, I showed them the bank statements, the emails from the gambling websites, the letters from the payday loan companies. With each new piece of paper, my son-in-law Mark seemed to shrink smaller and smaller into the couch cushions. His mother, Sharon, was openly crying now, her hand over her mouth. Finally, I picked up the last document. "And this," I said, sliding it in front of Frank, "is a copy of the second mortgage application. $50,000 taken out against my property." Frank looked down at the forged signature on the bottom line. He looked at his son's face, then back at the paper. He didn't yell. He just looked older, sadder. He folded his hands, looked right at me and asked, "Carol, what needs to happen to make this right?" Everyone in the room was looking at me. Frank and Sharon, the parents, were looking at me with pleading eyes, hoping I wouldn't send their only son to jail. My daughter Emily was looking at me, waiting to see what our future would be. And Mark, her husband, was looking at the floor, knowing he had no power left. I took a deep breath. "Here is what is going to happen," I said, leaving no room for argument. "First, Mark will check into a residential treatment centre for his gambling addiction. Tonight, his father will drive him there." I looked at Frank, who nodded slowly. "Second," I continued, "he will sign a legal document, a post-nuptial agreement, giving Emily all the marital assets, what little is left of them." I paused. "And third, and this is not negotiable, he will agree to a clean and fast divorce. He will not fight her on anything." I let my terms hang in the air. They were not cruel, but they were absolute. It wasn't about revenge. It was about cleaning up the mess and protecting my daughter. Then I laid out the final condition, the one that mattered most. "You will let Emily go," I said, looking not at Mark, but at my daughter. Now the only question was, what did Emily want? For the first time, everyone turned to look at my daughter, Emily. She had been so quiet the whole time, just sitting there, absorbing every awful truth. Her husband, Mark, finally looked up at her, his eyes full of pathetic hope. Maybe he thought she would save him, that her soft heart would forgive him one last time. She was always the peacekeeper, the one who hated conflict. But the woman who looked back at him was not the same one he had married. She was different now, stronger. She took a deep breath and looked directly at him. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. "I'll be calling a lawyer tomorrow morning," she said. "It's over, Mark." And that was it. The hope in Mark's eyes died. He just slumped back into the couch, defeated. His mother, Sharon, let out a quiet sob. His father, Frank, just nodded slowly as if he had expected it. He stood up and put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Come on, son," he said, his voice heavy. "Let's go make that phone call to the treatment centre." And just like that, they were gone. The storm had finally passed. But now, standing in the wreckage, my daughter and I had to figure out what would be left in its place. After they left, a deep quiet settled over my house. My daughter Emily and I just sat there on the couch, surrounded by the ghosts of the evening. The pile of papers, the evidence of her husband Mark's betrayal, was still on the coffee table. After a long time, she turned to me, her eyes red from crying. "Mum," she asked, her voice barely a whisper, "why didn't you ever tell me that you owned the house?" I reached out and took her hand. It felt so small in mine, just like when she was a little girl. "Because, sweetheart," I told her gently, "I never wanted you to feel like my help was a leash. I wanted you to feel like it was your home, truly and completely yours. My love was never supposed to be a debt you had to repay." Tears started to run down her cheeks again, but this time they weren't tears of fear or anger. They were tears of relief. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we just sat there together as the grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight. For the first time in a very long time, we were just a mother and a daughter again. We had a lot of work to do, but we both knew we would do it together. Where do you even begin to clean up a life that's been so broken? We began the next day. We went back to that big house in Westerwood, the one that held so many lies, and we started packing. We went room by room, armed with boxes and packing tape. It was hard work. Every little thing, from a coffee mug to a photograph, held a memory. Some were good, but most were now tainted by the truth. My daughter Emily was so strong. She sorted through the life she had built with her husband, Mark, and decided what was real and what was part of the lie. We sold his fancy golf clubs and the expensive watch he was so proud of. We even sold the shiny Lexus SUV. Emily looked at me while the man came to tow the car away. "I can't believe how much stuff we had that we didn't need," she said. I put my arm around her. "Sometimes the heaviest things we carry are the ones we can't even see," I told her. We used every penny we made to pay off that awful fraudulent loan. Finally, the house was empty. We stood in the living room, our voices echoing off the bare walls. It was the end of a chapter. Handing those keys to the real estate agent felt like we were finally turning the page. But what would the next chapter look like? 6 months later, you would barely recognize our lives. My daughter, Emily, found a small, sunny 2-bedroom apartment not far from my house. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was all hers. She filled it with cozy blankets and books and all of her little grandson Leo's colourful drawings. She went back to her job as a first-grade teacher, and the light came back into her eyes. She was happier and more peaceful than I had seen her in years. Our relationship was different too. It was better. We didn't talk about money anymore. We talked about books, and what to plant in my garden, and the funny things Leo said at school. Our bond was finally built on simple love, not my checkbook. One afternoon, Leo was sitting on my living room floor, drawing with his crayons. He held up a picture for me to see. It showed 3 smiling stick figures in front of a small yellow building. "Look, Grandma," he said proudly. "It's our new house. It's me, Mommy, and you." She wasn't living in a big fancy house anymore, but for the first time, her home was built on a foundation of truth. And I realised that's the only foundation that really matters, isn't it? A few months after we moved my daughter Emily into her new apartment, a letter arrived for her. It didn't have a return address, but she recognised the handwriting immediately. It was from her husband, Mark. He was still in that treatment centre his parents had taken him to. She opened it nervously, not knowing what to expect. Would he beg her to take him back? Would he blame her? But the letter was not what she expected at all. It was a formal apology, the kind they teach you to write in those programs. It was clear, honest, and filled with a sad kind of regret. He wrote, "Emily, I am writing to apologize without any excuses. My addiction to gambling made me a liar, a manipulator, and a thief. I take full responsibility for the pain I caused you and your mother." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He only said he hoped that one day he could be a better man and a father our grandson Leo wouldn't be ashamed of. She read the whole letter, folded it neatly, and put it away in a small box. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She just felt quiet. It was the final page in a very sad book. Is it possible to forgive someone without ever letting them back into your life? A week later, I had one last meeting to attend. I went downtown to see my financial advisor, Mr. Davies, in his quiet, tidy office. He greeted me with a warm smile. He had been such a rock for me through all of this, a calm voice in the storm. He slid a folder across his big, polished desk. "This is it, Carol," he said, his voice full of relief. "I just received confirmation from the bank. The fraudulent loan has been completely erased from the records. The case is officially closed." He handed me the final document, a single piece of paper that said it was all over. I felt a weight I didn't even know I was still carrying just lift right off my shoulders. It was done. "Thank you, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "For everything." He just nodded. "You're a strong woman, Carol," he replied. As I walked out of that tall office building and into the bright afternoon sun, I thought about how a few pieces of paper in a binder had saved us. My late husband always taught me that real strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room. Sometimes, it's about being the most prepared, isn't it? That evening, I had my daughter Emily and my grandson Leo over for a simple dinner. We just had spaghetti and garlic bread, nothing fancy. Leo was telling us a long, complicated story about a squirrel he saw at school, his eyes wide with excitement. Emily and I caught each other's eye across the table and just smiled. A real smile, the kind that reaches all the way up to your eyes. There were no secrets between us anymore. There was no tension, no hidden money problems, no walking on eggshells. It was just easy. It was the kind of peace I had almost forgotten could exist. At the end of the meal, I raised my glass of iced tea. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, feeling my heart swell with love for these two people. Emily raised her glass to meet mine. "To us," I said. "To our new beginning." We all clinked our glasses together, even little Leo with his plastic dinosaur cup. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were building something new, something small and strong and real. But sometimes, when you think your story is finally over, the world has a funny way of starting a brand new chapter, doesn't it? A few weeks later, I was in the grocery store just picking up some milk and eggs. It was a normal Tuesday afternoon. As I was looking at the different kinds of bread, I heard a young woman talking on her phone in the next aisle. She was trying to keep her voice down, but I could hear the quiver of fear in it. "I just don't understand where the money is going," she whispered into her phone. "Every time I ask him, he gets so angry. He says I don't trust him, but the bills are piling up." I stood there for a moment, my hand frozen over a loaf of whole wheat. It was like hearing an echo from the past. Before all this happened with my son-in-law, Mark, I probably wouldn't have even noticed her. I would have just grabbed my bread and kept walking. But now it was like I had a new set of eyes. I could see the invisible cage she was in, the same one that had trapped my daughter, Emily, for so long. I saw my own family's story in her tired, worried eyes. What do you do when you see a stranger walking down the same dark path you just escaped from? I didn't have any grand advice for her. I couldn't solve her problems, but I also couldn't just walk away. I took a deep breath and pushed my cart around the corner into her aisle. The young woman had just hung up her phone and was staring blankly at a row of soup cans, her shoulders slumped. I stopped my cart next to hers. "Excuse me, dear," I said softly. She looked up, startled. "I'm not trying to pry," I told her with a small, kind smile. "But you look like you are carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders today. My name is Carol." I just stood there with her for a minute in the quiet aisle. I didn't say anything else. I just let her see a friendly face. The young woman looked up, her eyes wide with surprise, and a small, watery smile touched her lips. "I'm Sarah," she whispered. We didn't solve her problems right there next to the chicken noodle soup, but for a minute, she wasn't alone. And sometimes, that's all it takes to find the strength to take the very next step, isn't it? My life is quiet now, and I am so grateful for it. It's filled with the simple things: gardening, reading good books, and laughing with my daughter and my wonderful grandson, Leo. The storm has passed, and our little family is safe on the shore. I thought my story was over, that all the drama was finally behind me. But life, it seems, always has another surprise waiting. I was sitting on my porch last Thursday, enjoying the evening breeze when my phone rang. I smiled when I saw the name on the screen. It was Dave Peterson, my late husband's best friend. He was such a good man. "Dave," I answered cheerfully. "How are you?" But his voice on the other end was not cheerful at all. It was stressed and tight with worry. "Carol, I'm so glad I reached you," he said, his voice rushed. "Listen, I need your advice." I sat up a little straighter. "Of course, Dave, what's wrong? Is everything all right?" He took a deep, shaky breath. "It's my daughter's new husband," he said. "Carol, you are not going to believe this, but he just sent me a text.